Mute myself here. Okay, I think this will work. Let's see if this works. So, hey, everybody, it's Drew from 198 Methods. I thought this year, for our annual charts and graphs edition, I would do a little slideshow of it. I just got to talk you through the things. So this is a different format to read through or not read through. The whole point is you're not supposed to have to read so much to interact with this one particular alert. So I'll talk you through the 3 graphs, 1 chart, and 2 maps that explain how we're going to fight climate change in 2022 and a little bit looking back on what's happened in 2021. So we start with the big analysis on climate change. It's similar to what it's been in past years, but this year's official science report from the United Nations has been nicknamed the Code Red report. For this reason, we see now more clearly than ever, and it's been clear for quite a while in the data, that climate change is real. It's happening now. Warming is unprecedented in the last 2,000 years. And this is the hottest century of time we've had consistently in more than 100,000 years. And the reason for that, if you look, the reason why this little spot pulls out at 1850 is that's when the Industrial Revolution happens. So it is burning fossil fuels is what is causing the climate crisis. The climate crisis is very real and very tragic already. We can see from these graphs we've warmed about 1 degree Celsius already and are rapidly approaching the 1.5 C target that we're supposed to be aiming at in the Paris Climate Accord. But of course, the other big news this year, right? President Biden comes into office and says he's going to do something about all this bad stuff. And so he went through and made this big commitment. This was in April of this year, right when he was inaugurated on January 20th. He took some quick actions like stopping the Keystone XL pipeline, and then took a couple months to get his plan together and came out with this. He pledges to cut global warming pollution from the US in half by 2030. That is very good. And then he also has a longer term target of reducing to what he calls net zero by 2050. We're not going to talk too much about the 2050 target because net zero is a bit of a smokescreen and a misleading moniker. But if you keep your eye on this 2030 target, that'll help explain a lot of what's been happening for the last year and what we're going to be doing next year. So the first thing is that Biden's commitments to date are not quite enough. His pledge to get to 50% reduction by 2030 and then net zero by 2050. This is actually the same people who made the previous graph. This one made this graph. It's a group called Climate Action Tracker. And what they do is they take the promises that national governments have made around the world, and then they chart them. You know, here's what you're likely to end up with. And the basic story from here is that if Biden did everything that he has promised to do, it would be almost sufficient, right? That would get us to about 2C of warming, about 2 degrees Celsius of warming by 2030, which is, you know, better than the 3C we're on target for right now, but obviously not enough. And what we promised under the Paris Climate Agreement was to get down to 1.5C. That's the little green part there at the bottom, right? So far, Biden has not yet promised enough, but it's almost sufficient. But then what he's doing, the things that are actually happening, are these lines up sort of more towards the middle there, and that's just insufficient. What we're doing right now puts us on a path to a 3C warmer world, and that is not good enough. 2C is close, but not quite there. That's what we would get if Biden did what he had promised, but as we'll talk about in a minute, he hasn't been able to do that either. So you might say, who cares? You know, why does it matter whether we're at 1.5C or 3C? Well, we got a big preview of what a 3C world would look like in June of this year. See if you can catch it as it goes by real fast. In June of 2021, what happened was the giant heat dome over the Pacific. You remember this, right? It was more than 110 degrees Fahrenheit in parts of the Pacific Northwest and Canada where they don't even have air conditioning because it never gets that hot. And it was a truly astonishing event. Bill McKibben wrote a great piece basically summing up like every climate scientist in the world was shocked by what happened in June of this year. And what happened in June of this year is what will happen a lot more if the world as a whole warms to 3C above current levels in the future. So it was a big deal to get this sort of preview of what's going to happen. And it was a really disastrous warning if we don't change pace. That's the difference between the 1.5C target that we always talk about and that we want, and the 3C target that we're on track for. And every, Greta Thunberg says this a lot, every percentage of a degree will matter in the future. Making it 2.2C instead of 1.5C is better. There you go. Did you miss it? It went by real fast. I'll go down one more. There you go. This is the slide you were looking for. It went by in a flash because it's many years and decades of data. But that big red spot over the Pacific Northwest and Western Canada, that was the heat dome. And you can see it was basically off the chart as a heat event. You'll also notice that there were big heat events that happened up in Siberia, over in Russia, across Europe and parts of the Middle East. This land surface temperature anomaly has been a global phenomenon and has been getting much, much worse as the climate crisis gets worse. So back to, that's the difference between a 1.5C scenario and a 3C scenario, right? 3C, very bad, looks like the Pacific heat dome. That's what we're currently on track for. Biden made some promises to get us closer to 2C. So that's like better than nothing, right? We should take progress where we can get it. So this is a graph that came out just this December from a group called the World Resource Institute. And what they're modeling is that same idea. What if Biden follows through on his climate commitments? So the purple line here at the top is basically if we do nothing at all. You can see emissions do come down a little bit. That's because more people are buying electric cars and solar panels and things. Some of that market transition is happening on its own, but it won't be nearly enough to cut our pollution levels. Scenario one there, the blue line, that's if we do what Biden has already done. So he's already signed some executive orders changing federal purchasing policy. He obviously stopped Keystone. He did sign that infrastructure bill, which has some investments in renewable energy research and things. So if we just do what's already been done, and if we follow through on that, we will eventually get to a 50% reduction in global warming pollution, but not until like 2050, way too late. Again, Biden's promise was to get there by 2030. The two green lines at the bottom are sort of where our story is. The top green line, the lighter green line, that's if we passed the Build Back Better Act, just as President Biden had proposed it. And as you'll notice, even with that Build Back Better Act, we don't actually get to the 50% reduction by 2030. We get closer to it than if we do what we've already done, but not that close. And we definitely don't get to zero by 2050, which is the other part of Biden's promise. So even if we pass the Build Back Better Act, we're still not making as much progress as Biden has said we need to make and as he's promised to make. And that's really kind of the big story at the end of the year here is one, obviously the future of the Build Back Better Act is really in doubt right now with Senator Manchin saying he's opposed to it. And the climate provisions are a big part of Manchin's opposition. So we don't know what will happen with that bill, that we will keep pushing for it. But even if we get that passed, there's still a lot more stuff we need to do, right, to get emissions down to 50% below 2005 levels by 2030 and then eventually get them to zero. And so the real question for 2022 is what is that bunch of other stuff? And so that's why this is in a fundraising email for 198 Methods and why we're encouraging folks to donate at the end of the year. This last one is just sort of a sketch. It's a mashup of two maps actually made by our friends at Oil Change and Earthworks and a bunch of other groups that are also part of the Build Back Fossil Free Coalition with 198 Methods. And I stuck the two maps together just to show you one, the Permian Basin is this huge oil and gas field, mostly gas, out in like New Mexico and Western Texas. And then these are all the pipelines or all the little lines that come out and they come down and in very small type, you can see there's a bunch of these new export terminals that are proposed from the Gulf. This is what we've been talking to you about. In fact, just in the last few weeks, we've sent you an email about banning LNG shipments by rail. Rail shipments of natural gas don't show up on this particular map, but they could be added. And we have also talked to you about the Seaport Oil Terminal, Blue Water Export Terminal, and a couple of these other VLCC, very large crude oil carriers that are proposed for out in the Gulf. One of the projects we'd like to do next year is we'd like to expand out this map and have it cover the entire US, because there's a bunch of gas shipment by rail, for example. There's a bunch of gas liquefaction stuff that doesn't show up on this map because it's happening in North Carolina and New Jersey and Delaware and places like that. And also, this doesn't include some other big projects that we've been fighting, like Line 3 and Line 5, which are up in the northern part of the country and are big tar sands oil pipelines. So all of this to say, one of the 198 projects we'd like to do next year is to build out a bigger interactive version of this kind of map so people can see all the fights. And also, we have a bunch of different campaigns we want to run to stop each one of these individual export terminals, to stop each one of these pipelines, to fight gas and shipping it by rail as opposed to by pipeline. There's all these different fronts to the battle on climate change, and we need your support so that we have the funding and the resources available to launch not just a couple more campaigns, but a lot more campaigns, 3 times more campaigns than we ran in 2021. So if you get to the end of the year and you like this kind of visual storytelling, you like using YouTube and Facebook as a medium to advance climate action, and you like linking up fights around the country so that climate activists in the Gulf are connected to climate activists in North Carolina, are connected to the ones in the Pacific Northwest who suffered under the heat dome and also successfully stopped a big gas export terminal out there in Jordan Cove. All of that kind of stuff is what we want to do in 2021 or 2022 with your support. And so we're asking for your help to do it. If you have a little extra at the end of the year, we really would appreciate anything you can chip in. My personal favorite is $1.98 a week, $1.98 obviously for our name 198, which is drawn from the famous Gene Sharp manifesto pamphlet about different ways to resist fascism and authoritarian governments. And we take that same ideology and marry it to digital tools and tactics like YouTube and Facebook, and making clever little maps and mashups and things like that. And we use it all to fight climate change. And that's what we are here to do. We'd love to do more of it, and we need your help to do that. So thanks so much. $1.98 a week is the suggested donation. If you can do that, that's awesome. Less than a cup of coffee, and it powers our activism all year long. But whatever you can chip in, if you can, please do. And if you can't, don't worry. We'll still be here next year doing this work. So thanks so much.